So while I have your attention, let me first of all introduce myself. I'm Sujant Chinoy, the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you, but more particularly to welcome also with us today Dr. Kiran Pasricha, because today's event is being organized by our institute in tandem with the Ananta Aspen Center. So that's the first point. Now, let me just go into a few housekeeping points which we normally bring to your attention. And I still have 3 minutes to go, so I'll use that for apprising you. Number one, we will keep all mics on mute at your end with your cooperation. And this is an event in which only the speakers will be participating. So kindly do keep your own mics muted at all times. Number two, if you need a break, as I have said before, for any kind of victuals, nourishment, etc., food and drink, etc., do please take your breaks, but kindly also mute your video at that point of time. And then when you come back on again, please unmute your video so that we can see you and you can see us. So that's the second point. Please don't misunderstand me, but that's to maintain the sanctity of the event and also to ensure that the speakers are not distracted with multiple activities on the screen. Number three, we will use the chat box for our discussions and Q&A. So no individual will be provided the floor other than the speakers. So bear with me on that. If you have a question, please note your question in the chat box. Please avoid writing things like "I have a question," because then I don't know what your question is. And if you write your question there, then I'm able to convey it. Number four, all speakers may also kindly use their time available to them to look into the chat box so that they are also au fait with all the comments and questions that are coming in. And finally, of course, I would request that whatever you write there, a question or a comment, kindly keep it very, very brief. Also choose the everyone option. So as far as comments are concerned, everybody will see your comment. Nobody needs to comment on a comment. But if you have a question, kindly keep it very brief and also address it to the everyone option so that the speakers and the participants are able to share with you whatever it is that you asked. And I will, of course, try to, in the Q&A session, very quickly go over the summary of the questions, and they will, of course, have the great details of where it has come from and who's asked that question. There may be no time to go over individual names. So these are some of the points that I wanted to make before we start. We will start very punctually at 11:30. It's really good that we have so many participants today. In fact, I understand that there are a very large number of people who have registered, and I welcome each one of them. It's 11:30, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I'm Sujant Chinoy, the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses, and I take this opportunity to welcome you to today's webinar, which is being organized in tandem with, in cooperation with the Ananta Aspen Center in India. And I just acknowledge the presence with us also of Dr. Kiran Pasricha, who heads that center. Today's webinar is on COVID-19, defense planning and preparedness. We have about 1 hour with us for presentations by various speakers and some time allocated for the Q&A session as well. Now, today's webinar, in fact, is part of a series of discussions on various aspects of India's defense sector during the COVID-19 crisis. And on the 21st of May, we had quite recently the Defense Secretary of India speaking to us on COVID-19 resource crunch and defense modernization. Earlier, we've had 3 rounds of discussions also with the US IBC on various aspects of the draft DPP 2020. The Chief of Army Staff also spoke at length on COVID and the Indian Army on the 15th of May. And today we could not have asked for a better panel. We have speakers who have handled complex issues, defense issues within the government, as well as in the armed forces. We also have a representative from the private sector, which is increasingly getting involved in defense manufacturing. So let me quickly mention the speakers that we have, the eminent speakers that we have today. We will begin with Shri Sanjay Mitra, former Defense Secretary. He will speak to us for about 5 to 7 minutes, max 7 minutes, on recent changes in the higher defense management. That is the Department of Military Affairs, CDS, etc. The organizational changes that have been brought about, and also speak to us about how the system is coping with the crisis, the resource crunch, polarization, prioritization, etc. Then we will have Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, former CISC. He will speak to us for the same time duration on impact of COVID-19 on preparedness of our armed forces, plan of action to tide over the resource crunch. After that, next we will have Shri Subhash Chandra, former Secretary Defense Production. He will speak to us on, again, impact of COVID-19 on defense production and plan of action for Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Next, we will have Dr. R.K. Tyagi, former CMD of Hindustan Aeronautic Limited, on the role of DPSUs and OFB in the fight against COVID-19, corporatization of OFB, which is a very interesting topic, how to enable DPSUs and OFB to play a much more meaningful role in government's plans for self-reliance. And finally, last but not the least, as I said, from the private sector, very important, we will have Mr. Jayant D. Patil, President SIDM and whole-time director with L&T. He will give us a private sector's, the private sector's perspective. So with this, I wanted to very quickly set the stage for the panelists. COVID-19 has come as a big shock to the entire economy in India as elsewhere. It has derailed revenue collection, and it has kind of enhanced expenditure at both the state and central levels. To cope with these difficulties, the central government has taken a number of steps. A stimulus package has been announced, and there is, of course, resort to much higher level of deficit financing than earlier envisaged. The resource crunch is likely to continue in the short to medium term. Defense expenditure is also likely to be affected. But the more important point is that defense preparedness is not to be affected. I mean, that's the target, really, since the security of the nation is far more important. And we need to also see how defense planning is handled in this phase. It assumes greater importance today than ever before. We need to see how the CDS and the Department of Military Affairs also cope with this, because this crisis has come very soon after the formation of that department and that post. And so obviously there has been some kind of an effect on the work that was allocated to them. The timelines that were given have obviously been stretched a bit now. And so every stakeholder, be it the armed forces, policymakers, or the R&D and production agencies, everybody has to gear up and think out of the box to overcome these challenges. With these few words, I now request the speakers to take the floor. I begin with Shri Sanjay Mitra. May I request Shri Sanjay Mitra to kindly unmute his mic and speak to us for about a maximum of 7 minutes, please. Shri Sanjay Mitra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chinoy, BG of the MP ITSA, for giving me this opportunity to make some preliminary observations to this very distinguished gathering. Of late, there have been a number of important announcements. We've had this talk about negative import list. We've talked about increased FDI. There has been an announcement regarding a separate budget for indigenous items. There has been a decision regarding Ordnance Factory Board corporatization. Simultaneously, there has been an announcement by the CDS regarding the qualitative requirements. And then we have statements regarding Huruf duty. The chairman NSAB has also spoken on these matters. Clearly, defense is on top of everybody's agenda. The NSAB and NSCS appear to have taken the lead in defining our defense thinking in the recent days. The CDS and the DMA have also begun to fulfill their roles. The DPC predates the DMA. It has already started the discussion on OMP corporatization, and its deliberations provided crucial inputs. It had also done some good work on infra building on the borders and islands. Its charter is quite different. It reflects the joint views of the Ministry of Defense, the service headquarters, the MOD, the NEA, and most importantly, the Ministry of Finance, and now the DMA. I think it will continue to serve a useful purpose and provide input from time to time. In the immediate future, we need to see how COVID plays out in the government's resource domain. It is too early to say anything. The expenditure cuts are there for all of us to see. I feel this will impinge the capex segment more. Thanks to the efforts of late Shri Parikar and his successors and the service headquarters, the requirements of revenue nature, namely ammunition, missiles, and consumables, have already been taken care of to a substantial extent by the respective service headquarters. In that sense, we have been lucky. We have bought some time. It is on the capex side that the full import of the latest announcements will form. The proposed DPP 2020 again predates these announcements. How do we propose to build them in? Maybe the House can deliberate on that. There have been many suggestions by the NSAB regarding the indigenous content and things like that, but I think we need more thinking, deeper thinking on how we will define indigenous content and how indigenous content will play a role in evaluation. Indigenization, by the way, will be driven by the user, the armed forces, and keeping in view the requirements of modernization and capability. I would reiterate that unless capital acquisition goes over to the armed forces, we will not be able to make much progress in indigenization. 74% FDI in indigenization needs to be harmonized. All major OEMs will be interested in the 74% FDI announcement, but we should temper our optimism based on the possibility of defense exports. OEMs will first insist on taking a share of the large domestic market before spreading their wings abroad. The negative list, once it's made public, will have great significance. We must be prepared to pay extra for the initial phase of purely indigenous acquisition. The DPP will have to explicitly recognize the markup for indigenization. Otherwise, we'll have problems with the holy trinity of the CAT, CBI, CDC, and the CBI. If you have to change, I am somewhat confused by the idea of a separate budget for indigenous items. It's not clear to me. It probably might result in creation of additional expenditure silos. If you were to run out of money in the foreign, for foreign acquisitions, will the finance ministry will now have to step in to allow mandatory LC-based procurements to be made from unspent indigenous, from the unspent indigenous, share of funds? That will be quite interesting. The strategic partnership will also become quite complex in the 74% FDI scenario. How do we now select the strategic partner? Prefer someone setting up with full transfer of technology and full IPR and a lesser share of indigenization, or somebody who's willing to share in intellectual property at a higher cost. These are tricky issues, and a clear finding will be required. Where will strategic buying fit in? We do strategic buying to keep keep a balance as far as defense procurement goes. Anyway, these are big issues. My basic point was that on defense preparedness, we are fairly well prepared in as much as regular, wherewithal to fight wars is concerned. The capital issue is a big problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitra, for giving us that overview and also for actually squarely sticking to the time allocated. And I'm sure the other speakers will have more to say on your point that CapEx is likely to be more affected than the revenue side, which is handled by the three services. And of course, answer some of these questions as to what's the logic behind having a separate budget for indigenous acquisition, etc. The negative list will be out soon, and who all will contribute fully to that making. of that negative list, that is also something that's bound to come up. I now turn to Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha to please give his comments, about 5 to 7 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good morning, DG IDSA and my co-panel and very august audience. I must thank you, DG and Ananta Aspin, for inviting me to speak, and also compliment you for the timing of this webinar, which could not have been sort of better time to remind us that that the necessity of planning and preparedness of defense is absolutely not notwithstanding COVID, because as far as China is concerned, the COVID has got over, about to get over, and we are right in the middle of it. So really speaking, the perceptions of our threats have not changed, but they have become more complicated. Our northern neighbor is testing our patience right now at the 4 different points. I'm not going to go into details because they're all there every day in the newspapers. But what I suffice to say that our northern neighbor, there is one thing is very clear, that his unpredictability is the most predictable character, and history has it all. Not only this is not the only time, because we didn't expect that he will come, but he has done that in the past as well. Therefore, our planning has to stand firm against any assertiveness on one border, and which is the northern border, and absolutely prepare for offensive action at any time on the western border. Because the changes are happening too fast. Sometimes both will be active at the same time. So on one border, we have to stand firm, and on the other one, we should be ready to, take an offensive action. So the principle of the preparedness of Army and Air Force, we must be equipped suitably, which I'm sure that our domain specialists are already doing it, because armchair strategists like me cannot prescribe a medicine for the unpredictability virus. A week ago, our Defense Secretary spoke here, as was mentioned by the DG, in a webinar, and repeatedly mentioned that the Indian Ocean is the one where the future of action going to lie. And during a question-answer session as well, he mentioned that Indian Ocean will require government's more attention in the Indian Ocean. I would go a step further to suggest that akin to our northern border, where we have some vulnerable points and pressure points of our neighbor in the north at international border, and sometimes on the undemarcated line of the actual line of control, where we are a little bit vulnerable because we have lost out a lot of land in Ladakh. Today's Indian Express carries an article of Ambassador Punchok Stokdan that is quite instructive. So what we should do is that we should actually be using neighbor's vulnerability to apply the pressure, or to indicate to him that should he continue his assertiveness on the land borders, we have strength to cut down his, the supply of oil, at least make in gesture. And if he remains belligerent, in post-COVID budget, it is likely to be, the assets must be used very skillfully and not allow the situation to go out of control. I would say that using the Navy in particularly 2 sea lanes of communication, one is the Gulf, Gondra Head and Malacca Strait, from where about 60% of their oil is imported. And another one is South America, Africa, Gondra Head and Malacca Strait. Now, these are important for 2 reasons. One is that the balance of the hydrocarbon comes from the South America and part of the Africa, which is Angola, is a big supplier. And also, importantly, the mineral import from China is roughly 55% of the copper requirement, which is required in the manufacturing of many weapons and ammunitions, and that comes from Peru and Chile, and that amounts for about 55%. So it is time for us to be planning and preparing for that eventuality. While we must have the preparedness for deterring China from adventurism and adequate, capability to signal that India will take the adventure to the sea lanes of communication if China does not behave itself. So we have not used this, but we should. Our threat perceptions haven't changed because they are likely to, and they are not likely to change. Uh, the minor changes, or maybe big changes which have taken place, are because of the new technology and the geopolitics of the world and the region. Thirdly, the nexus between China and Pakistan is something which we are witnessing for last 4 or 5 years. So this is what we have to think about. The territory, the land territory, and the island territories have to be kept fully defended and oversee. Not only we have to defend our economic interest area, but
Yes.
we have to have the ability to challenge the neighbors at sea.
Yes.
on
Please
these laws.
summarize now. Please summarize. Yeah.
So what we are seeing is that the budget is very difficult right now to say anything as to how it will come out. But with the policy of indigenization and getting the private sector on board very quickly is most important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Admiral Shekhar Sinha. I now turn to Shri Subhash Chandra. Before I do that, I want to thank Admiral Shekhar Sinha for pointing out the importance of SLOCs. But then, as you know better than I do, that this is not a time where we are necessarily escalating either on the northern border or elsewhere. And I'm, of course, reminded of the fact that World War II began. The Japanese had stepped in, not so much because of other reasons, but for the fact that their SLOCs had been interdicted by the Americans in the Pacific. So the point I'm making is that we haven't reached that stage, but that is for other speakers to comment on as well, and perhaps from the floor. Now, Shri Subhash Chandra, please, 5 to 7 minutes again. The floor is yours, please.
Am I audible? Because I'm not able to get.
You are audible. That's fine. And if you have bandwidth problems, we can just stick to your audio, because if you try to switch on your video, you might lose your audio as well. So we can hear you very clearly. Please go ahead.
So I think this is a very opportune time to discuss this issue, because from a defense production perspective, given the reality that defense preparedness, we can't compromise on that. So let's look at the imperatives and the opportunities that we have at the present time. Now, self-reliance is something that we have been trying to promote in defense production for a long time. And the Make in India initiative was in that direction. So the Atmanirbharta approach actually underlines that even more strongly. But this is, to my mind, it's more, it's easier said than done. But as Mr. Mitra mentioned earlier, I think we have to welcome the remarks of the CDS on the GSQRs. We have to also look at integrating the purchases, the capex, essentially with the new Department of Military Affairs, because the experience that we've had with the earlier regime of either 49% or 74%, which has now been raised under the automatic route. You see, the problems there we have is that, or as I see it going forward to save time, I would say that FDI through offsets and through the private sector would be a major expenditure in the defense manufacturing sector on aerospace and defense. And there, I think we have to look at several issues. One of them being that we have not, for some reason, been able to attract investment into areas relating to metallurgy, whether it is the steel for tanks or the materials for the aircrafts. And because we don't have control over that, and there is no linkage between the standards, the metallurgical standards which define the products which are manufactured by OEMs abroad, we are unable to start manufacturing that in India. We had started an effort to try and standardize the overseas standards with the Indian standards, and the PhD Chamber of Commerce has been working with the PSUs and with industry on that. But unless we start manufacturing the raw materials itself, we will not be able to take it forward. So therefore, the point I'm making is that while we are looking at the new DPP 2020, we should also try and look at the opening up of the or increasing the multipliers that we offer under the draft offsets policy, which has also been notified by the department, to also cover investment in the metallurgical side of the manufacturing. The second point which I thought we need to be focusing on is the kind of clearances. The security clearances usually take a very long time, and the security clearances from MHA or from the Ministry of Commerce, these need to be expedited if we have to ensure that the projects actually take off quickly. The last thing is, I think the services should also come together and look at actual platforms that they would like to actually get manufactured here. We are for some reason under the FDI regime only looking at components and spares, but not looking at complete platforms or products like a new jet engine, etc. So if we can get this organized through the collective exercising of our experiences, we should be able to work with them. Last point on the corporatization of the ordnance factory boards, I think we need to have a roadmap very quickly before we can even think of getting their shares listed. We need to monetize their lands. We need to open them to a route by which we can have joint ventures, allow the subsidiaries which are formed in India under the 74% investment route to also bid for the as domestic entities for the various tenders that actually come out here. Otherwise, the whole approach doesn't lead to orders and to a waning of interest, and then it's a fallback to a lower level of engagement itself. So these are the broad points I thought I will quickly mention, and if there are other further questions, maybe I can elaborate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subhash Chandra, for your very, very informative, illuminating comments. And I'm glad that you pointed out the dearth of certain capabilities in India, particularly metallurgy. And we've seen that in the manufacture of aircraft engines, for instance. Again, we have that same issue. Wherever we claim indigenized products, also sometimes we find that a large portion of the raw materials for indigenous metallurgy also end up coming from supply chains outside India. So, I mean, it's a gamut of issues which you have rightly highlighted. And I'm also glad that you pointed out the corporatization of the OFB, and particularly the possibility of a certain amount of monetization there of land and certain other resources. I will now turn to our next speaker, and that is Dr. R.K. Tyagi, who will speak to us precisely about the role of the DPSUs and OFB. The floor is yours, please. 5 to 7 minutes.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I adequately audible?
Yes, please. Please continue.
compliments IDSA and Ananta Aspen Center. It is a privilege to be speaking on this webinar, and especially about the role of DPSUs and the industry in India, especially in view of the COVID-19. When we talk of COVID-19, people have been talking that it is de facto the death of globalization. But apart from that, when we talk of self-reliance for our defense production in India, I am very happy to state that last 2 months our Indian industry has been doing an exemplary contribution as far as the COVID-19 preparedness is concerned. Like when we talk of OFB, they have spared 285 bed hospital for COVID treatment. They are making 1.1 lakh of coveralls, then also ventilators, PPEs. Similarly, Bharat Electronics, they are into making of some 30,000 ventilators, and they have also tied up with All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Rishikesh, for remote healthcare. Similarly, BDL, they are tied up with IIT Kanpur, and also like HAL and BEML, they are making a lot of contribution in PPE and hospitals. DRDO and the private industry, I must appreciate that at least 20 of the technologies which were developed by DRDO and now fully available to the private industry and free of cost to handle the COVID-19 challenges. It is something which is really doing a great service to the healthcare system in the country. So on the whole, the PSUs, defense PSUs, OFBs, and also DRDOs plus all private industry, including L&T and so many others, they have made a very good contribution in helping India fighting the COVID-19 challenges. Now, coming to OFB corporatization, I was associated with the corporatization of ONGC in 1995. And that time there were a lot of apprehensions in the unions and other people as to the monopoly will go away, the organization will die away. But what ONGC emerged out was there were better balance sheets. Profit and loss accounts were clearly available. There were potential developments in the field of merger and acquisitions. And in fact, ONGC benefited a lot when it came to the diversification and improvement in the business. And ultimately, as Finance Minister said, that it is the common man who will be associated as the shareholder of OFBs. I am sure that OFBs are in for a lot of growth and lot of visibility in their operations along with accountability. Now, FDI, 74%. I remember, sir, when we increased from 26% to 49%, and Mr. Jaitley, that the then minister, asked my opinion on it. I told him that technology is one thing which is controlled not by the companies, but by the countries. That is number one. Secondly, if they feel that yes, atmosphere is good, they will come settle the facilities in India and will help India become more and more self-reliant. With 49% increase, that did not happen. With 74% increase now, yes, the chances are very good that a lot of good technologies will come, but it will depend on two things. Number one, since technology is controlled by the countries, it is basically the political diplomacy of the country which will play a very important role in ensuring that OEMs from US, Russia, they come and they settle their factories here. That is one. Number two, FDI will come, but they will need quicker results as far as the financials are concerned. With foreign OEMs coming, we will have to make sure that we don't retract on RFPs. Audience will recall just a few years back, the Parliamentary Committee on Defense had commented that one particular service had withdrawn some 41 RFPs. We all are aware that replacement of Chetak is there. We are waiting for last 15, 20 years. So if we want FDI to succeed, we'll have to make sure that whatever is basically, whatever are our commitments as far as the technologies are concerned or the contracts are concerned, acquisitions are concerned, they are met in a time-bound manner. Now, when we talk of defense planning and preparedness, if we recall, we have already targeted that by the year 2025, we should be producing defense goods worth 1,75,000 crore, currently at 80,000 crore. Our exports should increase from 10,000 crore right now to 35,000 crore. And also, we should develop a self-reliance into 13 critical systems like submarines, fighter aircrafts, etc. I have 3-4 suggestions if we have to really achieve that goal, which is just 5 years away. Number one, it is a time we take control of the national projects. LCA, for example, if it is a replacement of MiG-21s, we are going to need 200 LCAs. In last 15 years, we made 15 LCAs. That means 3 LCAs per year. And we have gone into 311 technical modifications. Will we continue making LCA for 70 years? No. So it is a time when we go for aggressive participation and contribution by public sector as well as private sector on this project. Similarly, Dhanush by OFBs. We make 6 guns per year. We need 384 guns. That means 70 years shall we go on making it? No. It is a time when private sector should combine with OFBs and make sure that whatever guns we have to make, we must finish off in next 5 to 10 years. Now, this gives rise to another challenge. We as a country in indigenous capabilities have suffered because we are not gone for production mode. We have basically gone for batch mode. We'll make so many Su-30s in Nasik, then we'll make so many K9s at L&T, then we'll make only so many number of ships in different private shipyards. As a result today, if we find that the facilities at Nasik highly underutilized, L&D facilities, what they created, highly underutilized. ABG, Pipavav, Bharti, they are the same story where the assets were created and are underutilized. Now it is a time that we shift from batch production to we go for continuous production mode. We'll tell HAL, you will make LCH at least 10 every year for next 10 years. We'll tell L&D, you will make K9s 20 each year for next 10 years, 20 years. And by that time, you should shift your production line. So it is a time when we talk of national assets, not of the assets in private sector or in public sector. It's a time, number one, to take control of all those assets which were created and now rendered useless because of change in the requirement or change in the philosophy of the batch production. Now, time and cost overruns. 2 years back, I had brief interactions with Mr. Mitra when he was Secretary of Defense. And at that time, when we saw at the elementary list of the projects, more than 500 crore worth in defense, we found that almost every project has suffered on time and cost overruns. And we need to set up an accountability system for it. I think now it is a need when we talk of, like Subhash Chandra ji very rightly told about the materials not available. So you also spoke about engine technology not available. I recall very well when on the integrity issues, we blacklisted one of the engine manufacturers. We suddenly realized that 30% of the fleet of our Air Force just comes on the ground because the company has been put on holiday. It is an issue where we are vulnerable. So I think it is a time when we should have national enabling groups much above the current leaderships in Indian Army or Air Force or DRDO. It's a time when we should invite people like Mr. Mitra, Mr. Subhash Chandra, the ex-chiefs of DRDOs, ex-chiefs of the PSUs and OFBs, and have a national enabling group which will very strictly monitor all those crucial projects like LCA, AMCA, UCO, engine developments, FICV, manufacture of Arjun tanks, which will be enabled by this national supervisory body, and it will be directly having access to the Raksha Mantriji so that all these projects are in time. In fact, one of the biggest disservice which have been done to the self-reliance in defense is by overshooting the money and also in the time terms. You see any national project, and I'll show you it is a project which has taken 3 times of the originally envisaged time. Now, coming to the budget availability. I was listening to Mr. Ajay Kumar 2 days back.
I'm sorry, but one more minute, please. Please conclude your remarks.
1 minute, I'll finish. Yes, it is true that capex has been reducing continuously for last 10 years. From 45%, we are talking today availability of 31%. In fact, Mr. Mitra spoke about what was the need of indigenous capex definition. The reason is today, whatever capex is available, when it comes to the national commitments, the first payments are made to OEMs. The defense PSUs and private industry suffers. Like today, HAL has to receive 16,000 crore from Indian Air Force, and they had no money to pay salaries, so they borrowed 5,000 crore from the banks. Same is the story with BEML. Same is the story with BEL, and I am sure Mr. Patil will tell how is the payment situation in L&T. Today, the defense forces are owing at least 20,000 crore to be paid to the defense PSUs and private industries. For last 2 years, it is happening. Now, what is required? Railways had this difficulty. They created Indian Railway Finance Corporation, IFRC. On the same pattern, we should now create Indian Defense Financial Corporation, which will be allowed to take bonds and also make use of 8 lakh crore of the money which Indian banks have parked with the Reserve. Indian Defense Finance Corporation is the requirement today to take care of the financial issues. Last point, sir. Draft PPP 2020. I have been talking to the industry, 700-page document. And the comments every industry has given run into 300 pages. I am told shipyards, they have topped the list by even giving comments of 400 pages. Many people are saying, if we want to ensure that no procurement or acquisition is done in the country for next 5 years, just implement DPP 2020 and this objective will be achieved. My request is reduce this document into a 40-page document like ISRO does. Have a team of good people with integrity, even if they have retired, so what? Involve them into this acquisition process and make sure that red tapeism in this is reduced and this document is reduced to a 40-page document with a lot of trust and faith in the supervisory teams. This is what I had to say, sir. Thank you very much for giving me this time.
Thank you, Dr. Tyagi. You made very important points, but two stood out. One is this bit about Indian diplomacy should be revved up in order to get the OEMs to invest in India. I think you actually were referring to the fact that the DA's office, wherever it exists, in embassies, the office of the defense attaché, needs to be reviewed so that defense attaches are made much more responsible, and government is doing that right now. Much greater accountability. Just as our commercial officers are judged on the basis of the kind of trade that they generate and the kind of investments they generate in the other sectors, defense attaches, I imagine, would be judged on the basis of what kind of technology that they can get transferred to India, what kind of investments they can bring in. So the spotlight will be on the offices of the DAs there. And you did make very useful comments about creating an Indian Defense Finance Corporation, and also the fact that the DPP 2020 must be reduced to what is comprehensible, as in to attract people to come to India. Thank you for your comments. I now turn to our last speaker, Mr. Jayant D. Patil, the President SIDM and whole-time Director L&T. He, of course, will add to this perspective that Dr. Tyagi has just given us. Might I suggest to the panelists at this stage, this being our last speaker, that they tune into the chat box, where there is, as you can see, a very extensive commentary by various people. So you might like to look at what pertains to you. I will try to summarize some of these questions, but it will help if you go through this list yourselves as well. Mr. Jayant Patil, please, 5 to 7 minutes. The floor is yours, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And it's a matter of privilege to be amidst this kind of gathering. And it's truly important that some of these issues are getting discussed. To my mind, the COVID is a rude reminder to the whole world that you can't have global supply chains. And I think whatever neglect that actually happened in the Indian defense planning truly has come to a point that we now have to reiterate that we want to be self-reliant. I remember 27, 28 years back, the first time somebody talked of 70% to be done in India and 30% to be imported. And that after 27 years, we remain at the same place, and we need these reminders again and again. And obviously, COVID has done that great service, I would say, to that extent, to remind everyone that we need to build our supply chains which stand on firm feet locally. The next point I want to specifically make is there's some amazing new policy initiatives which have been put in, notwithstanding what Dr. Tyagi said. Yes, the document of DPP is too long, and subsequent to that, obviously, many new announcements have been made by the finance minister. The negative list of import, I believe, is an absolute right way, and we should not deter about it. If 2025, there are going to be 13 types of major platforms going to be indigenous. There's time we actually say we stop import of these. Only then industry will have the time to develop them and perfect them so that we actually stop import. If we don't do it, what happened in past 27 years will continue to be happening, because that's essentially where the R&D and the development of these products need to be funded. That funding can be collaborative, and obviously there's something that needs to be found as a way forward towards that. Now, when we talk of a negative import list and we also talk of a separate budget, I always were worrying about the quota, which Sanjay Mitra actually very rightly brought out, because if there's a quota system, then the money will always go against an LC, and if it actually happens, there's nothing going to be available for Indian industry, and that's exactly what has been happening last couple of years. Our acquisition truly is slowed down simply because there's just no availability of money, because the committed liabilities, especially the foreign payments, because last 4 years, if we total up, 2/3 plus has actually been physically placed in the form of G2G contracts. Now that doesn't leave money for Indian buying, and the Indian program then keep on shifting from one year to other year. The movement forward, obviously, there's been COVID has again brought in some new processes, and I must credit the current leadership to actually have pushed the digitalization of a lot of our processes. Think of DGK never would possibly think of these kind of things, but complete digital inspection has actually happened. We have delivered few Vajras fully digitally inspected from remote locations. Imagine 30 inspectors sitting in different places, inspecting and certifying and issuing an I note digitally. It's the Vajras are flagged off from Vijay Chowk digitally. This has happened in last couple of weeks, and this, to my mind, is again, you can use the crisis for keeping on brooding over it, or you can use the crisis to really move forward. Some of these things truly have moved forward. I clearly see that the corporatization of OFB, like Dr. Tyagi brought out, is a great step. My only worry is we are creating a 10th corporate, and finance very recent sector will restrict them to 4. Now, how are those 4 going to be created? Because if we are going to merge the 10 internally into 4, what exactly is going to be happening, and how are they going to do business? Because each of these major ones would have their own kind of pulls and pushes to try and avoid or try and do whatever. Now, any disruption, any change is opposed. The entire system would oppose it. That's essentially where I see huge challenges going forward, because the moment one says that you give away your part of the organization, there are going to be big issues associated with it. The bigger challenge I see is for the private sector in any of these 4 entities getting created. They are blessed with free assets, they are blessed with free money to a very large extent. Unlike every rupee, the private sector has to borrow. It's for the first time one is hearing HAL actually had to borrow. It's a normal life in case of private sector. We never made bones about it. But our capacities are not utilized. We need to create capacities and we need to pay for them in the form of asset servicing cost, which is nil in case of the PSUs as well as the ordnance factory. How does the competition guarantee level playing field? Because if it's not there, then we are again talking of a pipe dream. I see clearly 74% as a movement is a great thing, but at the same time, there are some huge challenges associated with it. The policies are absolutely clear. There's a new kind of a category which is about to be created, which is Buy Global, Make in India. That's the only category to my mind which truly should be open for this 74% or for that matter 100% kind of a FDI invested, because any other category you're killing the Indian industry in terms of what we do in future. Because the moment we start talking about 74%, imagine the same advanced world today does not even allow 26% equity to any foreigner in their own defense enterprise. It's restricted at 25 in most places, and in most places 20% you have veto powers everywhere else in terms of blocking, including sanctions. Capex delays I see as a huge issue, and obviously that's essentially where I see the problem in terms of going forward. Technology will come in with 74, there's no doubt. But as Dr. Tyagi very rightly said, and I agree with him, technology is not owned by industry, it's owned by the government. The issue is business will come or investment will happen if there is a business
Thank
case.
you.
Do we really have a business case? Do we really have a business case? We have a scenario that there is no output which is sellable, and here a single customer who would want to order every time on a competitive basis. If that's exactly the game, so I see that to be a fundamental reason why no FDI has come in. Because if I have to invest into a factory to bring it into India, what will I do with that factory beyond that first contract getting over and subsequent contracts not being assured or not even being
Please conclude.
possible to be done? Earlier, we used to never even allow exports. Today, exports are allowed to that extent that eases out situation. But today, let me also say, every country is getting into the Make in India mode. Every country wants investment to happen at their place rather than any other place. And we are going to be one of them. We are not going to be the unique one. So we obviously have to leverage our market in terms of regulating what exactly happens.
Thank you.
With that, I think the main points I have made, I would rest my case with that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. You have made your case, and also with great clarity, in a very purposeful manner. So I really appreciate the kind of clarity and focus that you brought to this issue. Coming from you, especially from the private sector, it is something that we all need to sit up and note, and especially those that are working on these issues in government. I'm sure they've taken note as well, those that are participating today. Now, we turn to the Q&A part of this webinar. Originally, we had kept aside a certain amount of time, but looking to the kind of interest this has generated, we will stretch our webinar by a margin. I will begin by briefly summarizing some of the questions, and on the assumption that the panelists have also seen the same questions. And then I will turn to each of the panelists to take the floor again. The first one is the ghost of the 3 Cs. I assume references here to the CVC, CAG, CBI, and is it really an underlying fear factor that drives acquisitions or non-acquisitions in India? In other words, is it a stalling feature of our defense acquisitions, this worry about what will happen if the CVC, CAG, or CBI finds something? Then a doubt has been expressed if corporatization of the OFB is really going to be the solution. And should that begin with very low technology areas like general stores and clothing? Then the panelists are requested to reflect on higher crisis management system as it copes with different types of national crises, including the COVID pandemic. And what is the relationship that this should have with the higher defense planning system in general? Next is logistical implications of transporting reinforcements to our border regions in light of current situations. What is required to ramp up production of certain types of military equipment for these purposes? Next is there are some which are specifically addressed to the panelists, and they would have seen these questions in the chat box. Given the aggression on our northern border, for instance, there's a question: do we see a similar possibility of the plan PLA Navy exercising muscle in the Andaman Sea on the same lines as in the South China Sea? The next is about shipyards going bankrupt in the private sector. At least 4 shipyards have gone bankrupt, and the project for aircraft carrier has had a time overrun, etc. So how do you see this when we compare it to other countries like Germany and all who do a much better job of this? What are the standards here that government wants to evolve for private and public shipyards? Next is the need for a multi-domain approach to our strategy. Again, this correlates to one of the previous questions where all threats are kind of seen in a holistic manner, land borders, maritime, and other crises that we face. Will any foreign OEM invest in India just based on Indian orders? And here the emphasis is on, of course, India emerging as an export performer there. Why not permit export of systems or subsystems? What are the kind of best practices and technologies that would be available in India for this purpose? Next is, what about homegrown technology? What do you feel about this? When can we actually have our own very own technology to do all this that we aspire to do? Last two, I will quickly run through them. Are we sure that increasing FDI in defense manufacturing through the automatic route to 74% will really increase investment from foreign OEMs? And this is something that we want you to comment on. Also, what is the private sector current ratio of R&D expenditure to sales in regard to private Indian engineering industry? And finally, blockchain-based smart, sort of technology, can it be used for disbursement of automatic disbursement of payments? So these are some of the questions. I will now turn to the first of our panelists and request him to summarize his reactions in the next 3 to 4 minutes, please. That's Shri Sanjay Mitra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sushant. I just respond to 3 questions. I had introduced the idea of 3 C's, so I thought I must respond to it. What I meant to say is that we have done a lot of acquisition under the 3 C's. The last 20 years, if my memory bears me right, we've done about 7.5 lakh crores worth of it. I'm not saying 3 C's avenue should stop, but when we bring in radical changes, like not sticking to the L1 formula, or saying that the indigenous content should be a factor in evaluation, which are the 2 points which the chairman NSCB had made, then it's at that time that I say that the decision must be cleared from the highest quarters of government, which I mean the cabinet, because those are major departures from the normal procurement rules and from the rules promulgated by the finance ministry through the general financial rules. Hence, there is a needed buy-in at the highest level. Regarding the higher crisis management system, the MOD and the DMA are deeply involved. They are involved at all stages, right from the first day that a crisis takes place or is about to take place. The cabinet secretary starts a mechanism of the highest at the National Crisis Management Committee, where everybody is on board. Take an example: the response by the army in West Bengal after the Umphan, super cyclone. That's the kind of quick response that the Crisis Management Committee has, and I think it's worked very well. Logistics for the northern borders, I think there is no reason to believe that the army is not adequately prepared to move all logistics to the northern borders. Indeed, I think that their planning is an excellent part of the way they function, and I think they would have taken care of all the logistics. And as I had mentioned in my opening remarks, we are reasonably prepared, more than reasonably prepared in terms of our war-fighting capabilities in the immediate term. So there's nothing to worry about. These are the 3 points I wanted to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mitra. I now turn to Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha. 3 to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Sushant. The first thing that I would like to respond to is the chair's question that he has said that we are not escalating. It is true. None of these, the nudging, which is pressure points, don't every time escalate. But if you have a pressure point, if you just demonstrate that you are present, it sends a signal. So one is not an escalation, but you have a signal that we have the capability of escalating if you escalate. Coming back to question of Commodore Samadar, Given the Chinese aggression, do we see a similar possibility of plan exercising muscle in Andaman and Nicobar Island on some lines, the same lines as South China Sea? Quite possible. It is quite possible. A number of times these have been discussed within the IDS and Naval Headquarters, and I'm sure that the overall planning of the Navy's capability building addresses that issue. But if we stop, then what will happen that we will lag behind, and 10 years later we may not have this capability. Major General Narayanan, is a very, very good question in the multi-domain approach, and this is our biggest, shall I say, the Achilles heel. But now I am hopeful that with the DMA coming into play and the CDS being there, it should become slightly more streamlined in next 2 to 3 years, because these are very old elements which can't be removed very quickly. Ambassador Yogendra, I know Mr. Mitra has partially answered that question, or rather fully answered. The crisis management group, the cabinet secretary and the armed forces, there is a group called the Defense Crisis Management Group, which is headed by the CIS. And anytime any disaster of any kind takes place, within few minutes it closes up, and all the service headquarters, operations room, the lines are linked, and there is a proper picture of each of the locations of the where the assets are, and therefore at the drop of hat, conveying people from one place to another, NDRF team to be flown from here to there. And in the meantime, the cabinet secretary has activated the National Disaster Management, and DCMG and the cabinet committee is not cabinet committee, the cabinet secretaries committee. They are working quite in unison. All the joint secretaries of various departments and the resident commissioners of those provinces, of those states, they are also part of the overall crisis management group. So I think it's a fairly well worked out setup, and there is no problems as such. Having headed that for 2-3 years, I think it works quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. I now move to Shri Subhash Chandra. 3 to 4 minutes, please. Mr. Subhash Chandra, are you with us? Mr. Subhash Chandra, are you with us? All right, I will request, are you there?
He is with us, sir. He is with us.
Can you hear me?
All right. I would suggest that between Dr. Lakshman Behra and the webmaster, please sort out this connectivity issue. Meanwhile, I will turn to Dr. Tyagi and come back to Mr. Subhash Chandra as and when his connection is re-established. Dr. Tyagi, please, 3 to 4 minutes.
Are you audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead, Dr. Tyagi. The floor is yours.
Just very quick comments on 5-6 issues. The issue of 3C. I had been in public sector for 40 years and 10 years as CMD of 2 organizations. 3 C's, when you deal with public money, 3 C's have to be there. But what my mentors used to tell me that number 1, whenever you decide something, give a speaking order. Record the reason why you are doing it and what are the circumstances with you. Number 2, he also used to say you should know the rules thoroughly so that you can break them, but make sure that you break them in the interest of organization and record it. And at least, sir, I've been very lucky. The ministry as well as the 3 C's, we were always able to explain to them. And I also tell you about, sir, in one procurement, we wanted to take a major departure. We referred to CVC. They said, we come in the picture only when you are decided. We said, no, we don't want to be explaining to you after we are done. You have to tell us right now. Reply came, they said, you discuss it in the board and take a decision as the board considers appropriate. So I feel this is as far as I have to say on 3 C's. As far as private sector R&D is concerned, sir, in developing countries, R&D, if we expect private sector to do R&D, it will be too much asking them. R&D must be done in the government sector. The government must fund for it, like DRDO, HAL, and they should pass on this technology to the private sector for development. Maybe after 10 years, we may be talking about private industry to contribute to R&D. Now, Shipyards. Sir, I feel really very bad when shipyards bank guarantee is encashed. We are not here to earn the money through bank guarantees. I also feel very bad when in Nasik, 500 MSMEs who were doing the production line of Su-30 are suddenly out of job. Their investment goes zero. I think, sir, it is a time we introduce a concept like independent external monitor in defense procurements, the concept known as IEM. Every Maharatna and Navratna company has this concept. 3 days back, I had seen a case where Pavan's Helicopters was not agreeing with the decision of ONGC. They approached the independent external monitor of ONGC, which is none other than Mr. Pradeep Kumar, earlier CVC. Both companies approached, and Mr. Pradeep Kumar will give some decision, but whatever decision is given is respected. I think we must introduce a concept of independent external monitor in the defense procurement, and especially when it comes to analyzing the indigenous industries for non-performance. Homegrown technology, there is no substitute. Nobody will give us technology easily. If at all we pay, we'll get some obsolete technologies. Homegrown technology is a solution. But for that, what is required is, again, a national enabling group. If there is a change in leadership, if 4 defense secretaries are changing in 4 years, and same way the defense secretaries and same way the DRDO chiefs, possibly you are going to need a permanent group of people who will be there for 5-6 years. The people who are not looking for now placements or promotions or appeasement with the government, they should be made in charge of this homegrown technology. I am again saying, in India, we say after 60, the person you are now retired, go home. I have seen there is a lady who is 84 years old now, and she is fixing rivets in a Boeing factory. I think we are talking in a technology domain where age is not really that relevant. What is relevant is eagerness of people to contribute. FDI success, it will depend. If we are able to ensure that RFPs are not retracted, if we are able to ensure that adequate business is going to be there, FDI will succeed. One audience talked about blockchain implementation. Blockchain basically is a good technology, much more improved version on what SAP is being done. But blockchain is useful when you want to record one event and nobody should be able to change. In our case, the problem is there is no money. If there is no money, we are not able to pay to the people whom we deserve to pay. And incidentally, let me also tell you, I forgot to mention, even DRDO. DRDO is today facing an acute crunch of the funds, even BrahMos. So I think the only solution is Indian Defence Financial Corporation as early as possible. With this, I think I have addressed the questions where I could have contributed. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, it's, different things mean different, sort of meanings to various people. When you talk about the 3 C's, in the context of India-Australia relations, the 3 C's are not the CAG or the CVC or the CBI. It's really cricket, curry, and the Commonwealth. But here, of course, the 3 C's are not what bring people together, but what seem to be figuring in calculations when they take decisions. Do we have Mr. Subhash Chandra with us now? Have we re-established the telephone line?
He's with us, sir.
Yeah,
Yes, I'd like to give him the floor, please.
okay. Well, see,
3 to 4 minutes, please.
yes, I think I'll take two issues. One was about the foreign OEMs being inclined to invest, even with the 74% liberalization that we have now recently announced. I think in the defense sector, if we are able to ensure that funds would be available to meet the orders, and this to some extent also links to the other question about the bankruptcies, I think it will work. For instance, if you look at the PSUs, I agree with Dr. Tyagi when he says that the PSUs have not been actually getting their payments in time. For instance, I would say that today our PSUs are sometimes doing more work for other ministries than defense itself. For instance, if you look at BEMEL, they have become more of a PSU for the urban development department because they have more orders on the metro side, whereas they have got outstandings of almost about 400-600 crores from the armed forces. So I think we need to, and that is why I said that it is better that this issue is handled holistically, so that the payments which keep ensuring that these various capacities which have to be built up or which have already been built up either do not languish or get wasted. I do agree that government has to look at the entire asset creation as a national asset. There is no point investing in a private shipyard which is not able to take orders. So either we try and amalgamate some of them, as we need to certainly do in the case of ordnance factories. Now, for instance, if we have the tanks getting manufactured over a dozen factories, unless we rationalize their production and offer some of the other factories as joint ventures under the liberalized route, offering your own land as an equity or whichever way we have as per the roadmap that is drawn up, we will not be able to infuse these centers with the kind of funds that we need. Suggestion has been made that we can start with the small arms. Absolutely, I do agree we have to do it, like we have done for the AK-203 approach. I mean, it may be HAL's land, but it is offered by the Ordnance Factory Board, and we have a JV going with a Russian entity. So I think we need to be looking at these issues in a slightly different way. Exports of assemblies, sub-assemblies, why not? This is something that we need to be pushing in this age, because if globalization is tapering, and if we have to look at the localization of these issues, I see no reason why we don't sort of have an approach for it, or at least try and explore how we can do that. That's what I would feel. I mean, we have to be optimistic in these things, and we have to take the suggestions or the policy directions which are coming. We need to integrate them to achieve. After all, defense exports is also an objective of this government. We have to scale that up. So I see no reason why this can't be done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Subhash Chandra. I now turn to Mr. Jayant Patil. Before I do that, one quick word on homegrown technology. The refrain that we've generally heard from our DPSUs is that it's also a chicken and egg kind of situation. Unless the order books are full, unless there is a reason for them to invest adequate sums of money in R&D, we're not going to have homegrown technology. So homegrown technology cannot be conjured up out of thin air. It really will come eventually from order books being full, and that really brings in the armed forces as well. And once the order books are full, there is some kind of assurance. The companies concerned are tempted to obviously spend more on R&D, and that helps us to move up the value chain. But that's just an aside that I thought I'd mention. Mr. Jayant Patil, please, 3 to 4 minutes. By the way, I have every intention of coming back for 1 minute sound bites to each of you again, because in the meantime, there were 4 or 5 more questions, and I didn't want to be unfair to those that put in their questions in the chat box at the 11th hour. So now, please, over to you, Mr. Jayant Patil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see some of these issues are very, very linked in terms of the questions. If I have to restrict myself to the make, IDDM, and the R&D, I see is extremely connected issue, because R&D one starts doing at certain level of maturity, or when there's absolutely nothing he has in hand. That is 2 levels at which one can actually start doing great R&D. Not for any other reason, but there are at least 2 organizations in this country who have invested in defense R&D at least for 35 to 40 years. We don't have so many of them in India simply because the same vagary of orders or same vagary of distancing the private sector. And I'm absolutely consciously making this statement because the next point that I speak will bring it out very clearly. If that is what exactly, many who would have done that. So the scenario we are talking is uh, when you do an R&D of a certain class, you're obviously ready not only for a product, but using your basic ingredients of technology, configure anything else extremely quickly within that family of products. And that's essentially what I call it as, ability to then do IDDM or for that matter, make. Now, we have not seen, we've been debating on the MAKE program exactly now 12 years. We have not seen the first MAKE program actually get signed and happen. So that's essentially where I think some of these investments, which the private sector willingly said they will do, have not yet actually even been enabled in terms of action forward. We got confused with Make 1, Make 2. We said Make 1 is for platform, Make 2 is for subsystems. And then we said, no, why not whole platforms in Make 1? Because somebody writes. Now, this somebody writes is a kind of a scenario in our industry and in our kind of a political system. Creates huge issues. And that's essentially where each of these initiatives, they come up and they die. Shipyard bankruptcy, I see very differently. And, it requires a good statistical analysis to see the shipyards and them have actually become bankrupt. If you look at 2010, go by these 2 decades. First decade, which essentially is 2010, when private sector was actually allowed to get into defense production, we have 95% of shipbuilding orders by value which have physically got nominated. Of the balance 5%, 2/3 the private sector won. So 1.7% is what out of that, so 5% was with the PSUs. So we're talking of 3%, 3.3% being physically going to the shipyard. Imagine a huge investments have gone in. Now look at the next 1 decade. What has it changed to? That 5% became 15% and 95 became 85. But by then, enough amount of noise was made, and 2011 onward, there's generally a policy talk. I don't know to what extent it is implemented because I don't see much of action in that there will be every program which will go through a competitive basis. Fact is, it has not happened. Even today, we see the nominations continuing. Even today, we see the old decisions continuing to be implemented. Even today, when it comes to major programs, we still require a separate chapter under DPP for nominated buying with government's design. If government can do the design, so can others do the design. Or if others can get access to a design, that's also a possibility. We are closed on some of those ideas. Now, when you are talking of over a complete 20-year kind of a period, less than 7 to 8% orders which have been allowed, and then there are at least 6-7 shipyards competing for that. What do you expect? Now, the competition will kill each other when there's absolutely no pie left. And that's exactly where you see the shipyards actually one after another getting into bankruptcy. There may be other issues with respect to efficiencies of doing them, but did we enable them enough is the fundamental question on that. Will 74% bring the FDI? I think I adequately there's business case I see. If there's business case, money will flow. There's absolutely no issue about it. Strategic partnership, there's been a specific question on that. I'll just take last 30 seconds on it. Strategic partnership, although the name is new, but some of the programs that are at least in the running have been actually being discussed nearly for 15 years plus now. We still don't see them actually to a stage, although selection process, all of us believe for some of them is in pipeline, at least the first 2, but it is not yet visible. In that same time frame, there are other strategic programs which genuinely have made some amazing success stories in India. So my belief is if we simply decide that we are not going to import and we are going to stop import, within 5 to 7 years, India will truly become self-reliant. So on the industry side, I'm one guy who is absolutely, I will champion that cause of, stopping imports. And we actually are seeing that the first indications of in that negative list of import, and by 2025, those 13 categories which the defense production policy draft talked of, if they have to be made in India, we simply have to stop import of all of those. And they will happen. My belief system, next 2 years, the Indian industry today has enough maturity, enough supply chain. Exactly in 6 months, we could actually build a 1400 partner supply chain and be delivering all my Vajras ahead of schedule. So this is possible. Issue is, do we want to enable and do we want to continue? And that's essentially where the future will actually get decided based on.
Thank you very much. And I think that last point that you made is also very important about the kind of surgery that's required in order to extirpate, the problem or the tumor. In other words, if you can't do it bottom up, you have a top-down approach through a policy and a negative list. Once and for all, you kind of impose that on the system, and that gives you all breathing time to play catch up. I personally agree. But that's only my point of view. Now, by the way, we have 3 or 4 more questions, and then I'll give a minute each to, again, each of our panelists. So what about accountability? For instance, there are major projects like Tejas, etc., which took more than 20 years. So there is a question about accountability in defense production in India. How do you make this system more accountable so that 10 years doesn't become 20, 20 doesn't become 30, and you don't have the kind of cost escalations that we normally see. Secondly, the Indian Air Force required, as we all know, for quite some time now, 400 medium capability aircraft, a combination of single or twin engine. And the process has again been in the system 20 years. So now the question is, any chance of a decision for Make in India for the 114 being considered? Next is how do we ensure that foreign OEMs come to India, and they're not going to do it simply when they look at the domestic market. There may be very limited domestic market. So obviously the global supply, being part of the global supply chain out of India, is what is likely to attract them to come here. And what are we in a position to do about that? Then how do they use India as a base to emerge as part of global supply chains? And lastly, as Georges Clemenceau had said, the French Prime Minister in the First World War, that war is too important to be left to the generals. Here there's a question which says R&D needs to improve and cannot be left only to DRDO. Both the private and public sector should be involved in what is termed as a national R&D project. So a penny for your thoughts again on all these points. Once again, I'll go down this list. A minute each, please. Shri Sanjay Mitra. Shri Sanjay Mitra, please.
Am I audible now? Okay.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Just one thing. Accountability, as I said again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, that you have to shift acquisition to the armed forces. Capital acquisition must go to the Department of Military Affairs. At least there will be one player less in the accountability business. Then it will be between the armed forces and the domestic industry. The other thing is that, by the way, our domestic market is much larger than any so-called export market. You talk of anything, you talk of rifles, we are looking at 800,000 rifles. This kind of order volume doesn't exist in the defense export market. So OEM will come because our market is very large. Rather than looking at the export certainly will happen. But when we talk of artillery guns, when we talk of rifles, when we talk of bulletproof jackets, our market is possibly the largest, because the other big markets have their own production system. That's all. Thank you.
Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, please. Shekhar, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Sujan. Just 2 points. One is Commodore Mamik has mentioned that L&T and MDL. Why are they bidding 2 separate sort of entities for the submarine 75 India? I quite agree with you, sir, that these 2 should form a joint venture and then make, because the integration and the some of the weapon parts, maybe MDL is slightly better suited in liquor, whereas for the building of submarine, the L&T is perfectly done, already proven, not once but twice. Commodore Savadar has mentioned that P-75 delays did not lead to shutdown of the MDL. Yeah, that is true, Sam. But it was a separate line altogether, build line, and there were other ships under under manufacturing or building, which has kept the MDL going, and they would have probably earned profit even in those times because the submarine was delayed primarily on account of those 156 items, which were to be procured from various small vendors with whom the French company had a tie-up. So I think the situation was a little bit different, just a little bit, having been involved. But this L&T and MDL coming together, maybe I see Admiral Lamba in the audience. If he could throw some light as to how they have become two different entities. Will it be better if both of them, come together and jointly become the strategic partner?
Thank you. I'll now move to Dr. Shri Subhash Chandra, please.
See, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, at this point, I think I would only say that defense is a sector where we have to have a policy that will enable both the manufacturers of the platform, the spares, as well as allow for exports. And only then, apart from meeting the domestic requirements, will it interest the FOEMs to be investing in India. But having said that, I think we must also be conscious of the fact that the requirements of the Indian forces itself will be somewhat finite. So whether it is guns or whether it is the submarines, investment has to follow a certain sort of philosophy. There will only be that much of investment or in return on investment that you will get from the Indian market. So the liberalization of investment has to be seen in the context of what are the limits to the Indian market, and you have to start looking even beyond. And unless we do that, the industry will not survive over a long period of time. That has been the approach that I think we have followed so far, that we should allow for the industry to manufacture not just for the Indian domestic market, but also look at the markets outside. That I think will have to be reinforced going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Subhash Chandra. Dr. R.K. Tyagi, please. Final word from you.
Sir, 6 minor replies. Number one, when we talk of order book, we are talking of defense industry, which is a high technology industry. We are not dealing with consumer industry who is making toilet papers and soaps. In defense, for companies to survive, they need to have an order book of 8 to 9 years. That is today the trend internationally. If you look at the 20 top companies, they have an order book of 8 to 9 years. Same should happen with our companies like L&T, Tata's and HAL. If you want them to deliver, you must give them an order book of 8 to 9 years. That is one. Number two, when we create a national facility, and because of some financial issues of an investor, the national asset fails. It is not only that person who fails, it is the people who are employed, the MSMEs, and it is a vicious circle. I remember, sir, 15 years back when we had a dynamic chairman in ONGC as Mr. Subir Raha, and I was acting as a head of marketing, MRPL failed. And Subir Raha told that, look here is a refinery which has failed and ONGC will acquire it. So whatever happens in bankruptcies and litigations, that will happen. But once a national facility fails, asset fails, government should decide who is going to take over that facility immediately so that the production and the continuity of operation remains. That is number two. Number three, there was one point raised about Indian Air Force. I must tell you, sir, against the sanction strength of 42 squadrons. Today they are operating with 32 squadrons. By 2027, they will be left with only 19 squadrons. And by 2032, if we going uncorrected, they will be left with 16 squadrons. It is a time now we should strengthen Indian Air Force by acquisition of more and more high technology platforms or making them in India. Now, sir, one question was raised on accountability. If you have multiple owners, there will be nobody accountable. In case of LCA, who is accountable today? Designed by DRDO, further done by Aeronautical Development Agency, manufactured by HAL, further R&D supported by NAL, which is some other ministry. If you want LCA to succeed, make one national advisory group who will have a oversight over all these players. National projects need national teams, not multifaceted team. And sir, one thing more very important, defense manufacturing. A very senior officer last week said that Air Force will need only LCA and nothing else is required by them. After 3 days, I saw Chief of Indian Air Force on the media saying that no, I will need this, but I'll need other thing also. 3 days back, Secretary of Defense said that we need to concentrate on blue level ocean preparedness. And suddenly a statement comes from somebody big in the government again that we have to concentrate more on the northern border, not on the Indian Airways. My submission is a national strategy should be kept confidential and it should not be leaked or discussed in the media. There should be people who should be assigned to it and the people should be accountable. So with this, I think, sir, whatever I had to say, foreign OEMs, make only 2 rules. Number 1, if I issue a RFP, I will not be able to cancel it. Number 2, when I issue a RFP, I should also define that I will conclude this procurement in 4 years or 5 years. If I'm able to define a timeline, I can assure you that a lot of manufacturing will take place in the country. The problem today is the gap between the issuance of AON, issuance of RFP and issuance of order is very, 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 very high. And there's a lot of retendering which is taking place. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jayant Patil, last word. Mr. Patil, 1 minute, please. Yeah, 1 minute,
Yeah.
please. 1 minute.
Yes,
Just
on
1 minute.
accountability,
Yeah.
I see very clearly when you have empowered headquarters which are created, and I'm obviously hinting at some strategic programs, you see that the cost escalations are nil. Now, the issue primarily is you see the same thing happening in ISRO, you see the same thing happening in other strategic sectors, and so is in the strategic part of defense. You don't really hear too much about the escalations there or the extra costs there. The accountability begins because of empowerment, which is created in the form of an empowered set of people, which is the point which Dr. Tyagi is making. And an amazing example is there in the form of what is ATVP all about. Now, you actually find ways and means to do it within what is allocated to you, and that leads to enormous amount of innovation. The indigenization content between different platforms, and let me not say how many and what all we are talking about, but it has more than become twice. Now, the scenario we are talking is we are talking of in a comparable, not in terms of capability or size, but the program where it is the reciprocal is true in terms of indigenous content, and here the indigenous content is the other end of the reciprocal. So that's essentially where my point about accountability, it will happen. The innovation comes in, the R&D actually comes in at that point in time, because if you are told under no circumstances you will get any money, you will innovate, you will make things happen within that budget and that cost. And that's essentially where it's a maturity for industry that say, I will do R&D of my own. Now, this R&D today truly can collaborate, because absolute from fundamental requirements, if somebody can design and build a complete product or let's say a platform, and those capabilities today exist in industry, it's not only in the national R&D sector. It happens with ISRO, it happens with NPCI or BRC, it also happens with some of the defense sector, but not in the rest of the defense sector. And that's essentially where if we actually decipher what are those common successes which we actually created, and some of those successes need a replication, then we already have a solid example to actually learn out of those specific things. On the case of the FDI and making for India as well as for export, I only have one point. We have a negative tax structure. If I import something for my defense forces, it is zero tax. If I buy subsystems from within the country, it is at 18% GST. If it is a platform, let's say warships, for that matter, other platforms, since I don't make, I don't really know, but on the army systems I do, you actually see a terminal tax at 5% and input tax at 18%. We have an absolutely upside down scenario. Now, how does one make sense if you are buying in any platform, 60-70% of your value chain is bought outs? You have 18% on that 60-70, which you will account someday when you sell after 2 years. What happens to your cost efficiencies and tax efficiencies? So that's essentially where I see an issue in terms of anybody who we expect come to India will have to address some of these issues specifically. Without that, any investment other than the business case will actually not make sense for a foreigner.
Thank you very much. I think we should use this to have another seminar in the not too distant future to examine some of these very key points that you made. Just as we often have cost overruns in defense production, today we've had time overrun in terms of our webinar. But you would all agree that it was a time very well spent. And since Shekhar Sinha has brought to my notice the participation of Admiral Sunil Lamba, I'm wondering if he wants to chip in with just 1 minute of some response to what has been said so far. Admiral Lamba, would you like to step in with comments for 1 minute? Go ahead, please.
Is about submarine constructions. We have to, with great deal of effort and investment of money over the past, say, decade, we set up 2 submarine building lines, MDL and other along with L&T at the SPZ facility in Visakhapatnam. And both these are strategic partners, one for the conventional boats line and the other for the nuclear submarine program. And I think that is the way for this. It's been an interesting discussion, and I'd like to compliment the panelists. The main issue about defense procurement and preparedness is the whole system needs to be looking at outcomes and not at the process. There's too much of focus on the process and not on the outcome, and that is the major pitfalls. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Admiral Lamba, for those words in conclusion. It's a kind of little summary also of the broader points. It only remains for me to thank at the end of this wonderful webinar our panelists, Shri Sanjay Mitra, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Shri Subhash Chandra, Dr. R.K. Tyagi, and Mr. Jayant D. Patil for their very, very enthusiastic contribution to our webinar. I also want to thank all participants who have joined us. In particular, I want to thank Ananta Aspen Center, Dr. Kiran Pachricha and her team. And on my side, I want to thank in particular Dr. Lakshman Behra, who has worked hard to put this together. Of course, a word of thanks also goes to our webmaster, who has not complained so far, but he's doing at least a webinar or 2 a day, and that's Piyush Singh. So a word of gratitude to our team as well. And let's hope that we meet again to take up some of these discussions once again in the near future. With these few words, I wish you good health and good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.